So our hometown boasts of many famous and influential families, some of which are with us here this morning. Generations that have made Sarasota rich in history and in culture. But few families or individuals can compare to the charismatic and spectacular Wallenda family. A circus town, Sarasota attracted the Wallenda family a long time ago, and they stayed, making their indelible mark here and throughout the world. This man, a celebrated member of the remarkable Flying Wallenda High Wire Troupe, has been taking audiences' breath away for decades. He has literally walked over lions and tigers, no bears, but man-eating sharks. And he has walked high in the air between buildings and over rivers and waterfalls, and he has lived to talk about it. And we're thankful. But taking audiences' breath away is only a small part of what this man aims to do when he comes before a crowded room like this. He digs deep into his multifaceted performing life, and he draws out the guiding principles that only a man who loves his God can do. With his wife, Olenka, and their family, the Tino Wallendas have performed and shared their personal life testimony of the goodness of their God with Christian audiences worldwide and to prison ministries throughout. It is truly my honor to introduce to you this morning our keynote speaker, Mr. Tino Wallenda.
You know, in the circus, you most often, when you're going to come on, you'd like to have the act or the individual or the group before you to be of exceptional nature, because it makes you look better. And I think I could not have been much better preceded up here on this platform than by the Ditchfield family. How about another wonderful hand for them? Well, the Wallendas came to the United States via Cuba, where they were performing in 1927 with a circus down there. Was very reluctant to let them go because they were the headliners. In fact, John Ringling of Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus heard about the Wallendas and thought, I'm going to go down and have a look and see what it's all about, what they're doing. Well, the thing was that every time that John Ringling would sit in the audience in Havana at the circus, because they didn't want to lose the Wallendas, they didn't allow the Wallendas to perform that particular day or that particular show. John Ringling actually had to go out on the boat to sail back to Miami, except he snuck back on the pilot boat to see the Wallendas perform. Immediately, he hired them and wanted them to come to the United States and perform Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus in Madison Square Garden. He booked them, but again, the circus was very reluctant to let them go. In fact, when all the Wallenda equipment arrived at Madison Square Garden, there was one item that was left behind. All high wire acts at that point performed with a net. The circus retained the net in Havana. The Wallendas set up the equipment along with the riggers on the show and discovered the net wasn't there. Well, what do we do? It's opening night. My grandfather decided we would go up and perform regardless. Well, as the Wallendas performed 50 feet in the air without a net, doing their incredible 4-person, 3-level pyramid, when they came down to the center ring for the applause, well, there was not only applause, there was a lot of hooting, there was a lot of stamping of feet, and the were horrified. Because in Europe, that would have been a great insult to hoot, to stamp your feet. And they quickly left the ring, went to the dressing room, quickly trying to change to see if they could make it to the boat yards to sail back to Europe because they thought they would be lynched. Well, the impresario, the ringmaster, asked the Wallendas, went to the dressing room and explained to them in German, of course, that no, this is the greatest honor here in the United States. They really appreciate you. And so the Wallendas came back to the center ring and stopped the show with applause, hooting, and stomping for at least 15 minutes. That's something that has never been heard before or to this day, as far as my knowledge is. Of course, we continued on doing well, you know what? Let me just take you to a performance and show you exactly what the Wallendas do. I brought a video along, and if our technician over there would like to, and if you please take a look at the screens, we will show you something that happened just, well, many years ago, actually.
Ladies and gentlemen, and children of all ages come to the circus for the spectacle, the animals, and especially the thrills. And for the last 70 years, few acts have provided as many thrills as this one.
The most celebrated name in show business. The Flying Wallendas.
But 36 years ago, here in this very same arena, the State Fair Coliseum in Detroit, the Wallendas suffered their greatest tragedy. While performing the dangerous 7-person pyramid 25 feet above the ground without a net, one of the acrobats lost his footing. The pyramid crumbled. 3 of the men fell to the ground. 2 died, 1 was paralyzed. The troupe has performed the pyramid just 2 times since, but not in the last 21 years, and not in Detroit. A preview performance for the media and guests Thursday night, the Wallendas attempted the pyramid once again, but not before a promise.
My children will show you it will finish what we started to do the last time we were in Detroit.
And a prayer. They slowly built the pyramid and moved ever so deliberately across the high wire. As they safely reached the other side, the relief was evident, not only from the family, but from the small group of people allowed to view the preview. As they left the arena, the Wallendas shared the emotion of the moment. But the pressure is only started. Friday night, the family will attempt the pyramid before the public in the same arena where the stunt ended so tragically 36 years ago. It is scheduled to try it a total of 38 times during the 17-day run of the Shrine Circus here. But it's something the family says it has to do. There'll be no grounding of the Flying Wallendas. Ed Garston, CNN, Detroit.
And we did successfully perform that 7-person pyramid for the 38 shows that we were supposed to do. That was back in 1998 and continued to do it until my particular branch of family. We did it for the last time 2 years ago in Germany for one of the most famous shows in Germany called Flick Flock. And since the Wallendas, going back in the history, came to the United States to Ringling Brothers in 1928, that's when John Ringling moved his winter quarters right here to Sarasota, Florida. Consequently, our family bought homes here. Children were born. I, in fact, was born right here, about 3 blocks from here. Not that place that you see over there. It was called Sarasota Memorial Hospital, but it was a 2-level wooden structure at that time, which eventually got moved across the street, and then they destroyed and hauled it away. Grew up here in Sarasota, went to Central Elementary. Now, if you don't have a clue where Central Elementary is, come and talk to me afterwards, and I'll tell you exactly where it was located at one time. Sarasota Junior High, Sarasota High, and of course continued on from that point. Now, what I wanted to do was give you a little demonstration of tightrope walking, live right here in front of you. We obviously, with the height here, we really couldn't set up tightrope, and we would have to drill anchors into the floor. But what I do have is this apparatus that allows me to show you exactly what it's all about. And it all started for me when I was just 7 years old. That's when my grandfather Carl Wallenda, probably the best-known tightrope walker of modern times, put me on the wire. Don't worry, it only goes so far. He taught me the elementary skills of tightrope walking. Things like how to hold that balancing pole, how to place my feet on the wire. But the most important thing I learned about maintaining my balance up here was that I needed to focus on an unmoving point at the far end of the wire, which in this case happens to be where these three pipes meet. That is how a tightrope walker maintains his balance, focusing on that point. But I have been doing it for 60 years now. And with that time and experience, I do have the ability to look around, to talk to you face to face. But invariably, well, there's no wind in here, but if I lose my balance for any reason whatsoever, my vision will immediately and instinctively return to that point so that I can regain my balance. Once this all becomes pretty much second nature, in other words, I can do it without much thought, then, and only then, did my grandfather allow me to take my first few steps on that tightrope. You move up to some simple little feats, like one we would call salute. Another simple trick that you would learn along the way would be a knee-down salute. But you see, I learned real early on that I couldn't take care of my family, pay my bills, by simply walking back and forth on a tightrope and doing some simple little stunts. So I really had to put myself to my craft, to train, to rehearse, so I could move to doing bigger and better things. Things like standing on my head. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm a little bit out of breath. And I found that as time goes by, that I get more out of breath more and more often. Plus, when I get up from that headstand, I see a lot of stars flying around both over my head. And I've discovered that I really need to pace myself. So would you put that up there for me? Sometimes I just need to kind of sit down and catch my breath. So with your permission, I'm just going to kick back and chill with the rest of you for a couple of minutes. But while I'm chilling, let me tell you how that lesson that I learned from my grandfather has been very instrumental in my career. That lesson about focusing on a point. You see, as a tightrope walker, I've had lots and lots of close calls. And I've never actually fallen from the wire to the ground, but I can tell you I've fallen many, many times to the wire itself. And there's something that always holds true every time I've had one of those falls. It always hurts. I can tell you about sprained wrists, sprained ankles, times I've fallen on my side and cracked my ribs, and I've done that at least 4 or 5 times. Tell you what, those instances really, really hurt. But my grandfather was a man of great integrity. In fact, he lived by that adage that you've all heard sometime or another from the circus, which simply says the show must go on. Now to you, they might be just words you can just spit out of your mouth. To me, they go down a lot deeper because they talk about life itself. And life has a habit of just kind of unfolding. So when I'm hanging there in severe pain, obviously, I could just let go. But I'm sure you'd agree with me, that being one of the stupidest things that I could do. Now, you see, when I'm hanging there, no matter how I feel, the only thing that really makes sense is to get myself back up on that tightrope, get focused on that point, and continue on. Now, that's a lesson in life itself. Because if you'll focus in on a goal in life, if you persevere, if you keep going, if you don't give up, let me tell you, you can accomplish absolutely the impossible things in life, just as the Wallendas have done over and over and over again. And by the way, what I need to tell you is that I've lived pretty much my life walking the straight and narrow. The reason for that is because my primary focus in life has been on Jesus Christ. Now, there's a reason for that, too. You see, as a Wallenda, I've realized how fragile life is, that it really holds no guarantees. We're here today, but we have absolutely no guarantees of tomorrow. And it doesn't take anything more than just one little bitty old... Doesn't take anything more than one little slip, and you enter that reality of what life is truly all about. It's an expectation and a preparation for eternity. Our family has had lots of slips, just like you saw in that video a few moments ago. 1962, Detroit, Michigan. 3 men falling to the ground. 2 of them losing their life. The third one, my uncle paralyzed from the waist down. My grandfather, as he fell to the wire, the girl who was seated on the chair above him fell on his back, and somehow miraculously he was able to hold on to her until they could get a makeshift net underneath, which was nothing more than just a mat that was in the center ring. And when they dropped her in it, she still suffered a severe concussion. My grandfather, from catching her, cracked pelvis and a double hernia. And you see, I said the show must go on, right? What do you do in a situation like that? My grandfather, in that type of condition, the fact that he was the patriarch of our family, still is as far as I'm concerned, even though he's no longer with us. The leader of the troop, the one that put every person in their place, his own son lying on his, what he thought was his deathbed because they didn't think that he would survive. What do you do with the show must go on? The very next day, my grandfather was in costume at 1 o'clock, forced them to release him from the hospital. As he left, my mother walked up to him, called him a murderer to his face. Still, 1 o'clock, he was in costume, up on that wire doing his best for the audience. Why? Because you see, life does go on. Life does continue. You can't give up. You have to keep going. And what about my uncle? You know, I said that he was paralyzed from the waist down. One of the first things he did when he came home here to Sarasota was go to my grandfather at our house over in 1623 Arlington Street. He said, "Dad, I want to get back on that tightrope again." My grandfather, who was a guy who did the impossible pretty much every day of his life, he just couldn't figure out how this would work. He said, "Sorry, my son, I can't let you on that tightrope, not without the use of your legs. But let me tell you what happened just about 8 years ago or so. We strung a cable over the Chicago River in downtown Chicago. It was probably 60 feet in the air, some 400 feet across. Came up with a contraption very much like this chair, except that a wheel in the front and one in the back and a motor on the inside. And that morning, after over 40 years of not seeing his dreams fulfilled, my uncle was sitting on that chair with his balancing pole in his hand, riding back and forth across the Chicago River." You see, you can never give up your hopes. You can never give up your dreams. You always have to keep your focus. Unfortunately, Detroit wasn't the end of our tragedies, because in 1978, as my grandfather was walking between 2 buildings in San Juan, Puerto Rico, not because of the wind, which is what's the popular idea, but because of the way the equipment was set up, he wasn't able to maintain his balance. He fell 120 feet to his death. You see, as I said before, life is a vapor. It's so fragile. And you know, one day I know I'm going to make that final slip. Well, I don't expect to be in front of you today. I don't expect it to be on a tightrope at all, but one day, whether it's by sickness, disease, some form of an accident, I'm going to make that final slip. And in the next instant, I'm going to stand before my Creator. And I'm going to have to give an account of myself for everything I've done in my life, whether it was good or bad. And as I look back in my life, you see, I know that I've made lots and lots of mistakes. I also know that God calls my mistakes by another name. God calls my mistakes sin. Now that simply means I don't live up to his standards or his expectations because he's perfect. He can't do anything wrong. And I'm the opposite. I can almost do nothing right except maybe sit on this chair up here. But for that reason, I can never hope to live with him in eternity. But here's the greatest news that I ever heard. That there was a man who came to the earth from heaven. He was completely 100% God. And he was also completely 100% man. And he cared enough about me that he was willing to surrender his life to evil men who tortured him, killed him. Why did he do such a thing? Because he saw my predicament. He saw I had no way that I could work my way to heaven. So he was willing to take my place. That if I will simply confess with my mouth that Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and if I will believe in my heart that God raised Jesus Christ from the dead, I don't have to worry about or think about, because I can know with all certainty when my life comes to an end, I have a place in heaven. Now, I'm delicately balanced here between life and death, between heaven and hell, as it were. If something were to happen to me, I wouldn't certainly like the way it happened, but I know where I'm going. The question you might ask yourself is, if today were the last day of your life, where will you spend eternity? Will it be in heaven, or will it be in hell? See, that's a choice that I can't make for you. It's a choice that can't be made by the leader of your church. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. Doesn't matter what church you belong to. Listen, doesn't even matter if you're good or bad. All that counts is what will you do with Jesus Christ. And the Bible says that today is a day of salvation. Today, if you hear his voice, don't allow your hearts to become hard. Now, folks, this has been maybe a little bit heavy duty, so maybe we'll lighten it up a little bit. I've got just a few more minutes here. I want to call a very old friend of mine up to the platform. He was my band leader on a circus that we performed together on years and years ago. Leo Machito over here. Leo, will you want to come up here? Now, Leo has a very varied history and career. He, as I said, he's a very accomplished musician. He was the band leader on the show we were on. He has been the music minister of the Tabernacle Church at one time. Come on up here, Leo. And he's one of my favorite people in all the world. Now, Leo, we have never done this before, right?
I've seen you do it.
So, Leo, I thank you for volunteering. Take your jacket.
It's worse when you've seen it.
Take your jacket off. Now, Leo, I want you just to, because I didn't know who to call on. Everybody looks like they have hard shoes on, and your shoes have a little bit rubbery soles, it looks like. I figured they would have, because he's got to go back to work as soon as we get done here. He keeps the tabernacle in pristine condition all the time. So, Leo, what I want you to do is I just want you to show the people how difficult this is. Because I want to come out looking really good like I did after coming up after the ditch fields.
Thank you.
But, Leo, I'm going to stand off to the side here. Okay. And so when you go up here, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to have my hand extended. If you want to use a little bit of help, you can grab my hand, my arm, my little finger, whatever, to give you a little bit of help to stay up here, okay? Okay, Leo, so we're short of time, so he gets my hand right away. Okay. there you go, Leo. Okay, now at some point, now his wife is accomplished tightrope walker too, not high but low. You can let go anytime you want,
Yeah.
anytime. Oh, okay. So Leo, I just want to prove to everybody that it's harder than it looks.
Absolutely.
Correct? But I also want to show everybody how it can be made very easy. Now, as we said, you've never done this before. So, but would you say, and of course you've watched me for over probably 45 years now, you've watched me perform, would you say that perhaps I am a pretty good tightrope walker?
Absolutely.
Would you say that maybe I am a master of the tightrope?
Yes.
How about, from seeing what you saw me do, would you say that I may be a master of the tightrope? So Leo, we need to turn this around because we don't have a lot of room up here. I'm going to put it this way. And I want, by the way, I didn't introduce my lovely wife here. She also comes with the same heritage that I do. She is also a sixth-generation performer in the circus. She started at a young age working with her family on unicycles. And by the time she was a teenager, performed on the trapeze. And then for over 20 years, performed with me on the high wire. That's my wife, Olinka. All right, Leo, what I need you to do is I need you to come around back here, and we're going to move quickly here because I'm not going to give you the pole, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to step up on this makeshift tightrope, and Leo, I want you to, I don't know if you can reach my shoulders. All right, step up if you can. Now, what you need to know, Leo, is that the more you trust in me, the easier this is going to be. The more you try to do it for yourself, the more difficult. Also, the closer that you can stay to me, the easier it's going to be. You got all that? Okay, Leo, we're going to take a step. And we're going to take another step. And Leo, we made it all the way across this 50-foot pipe. And we made it, Leo, but I realize you don't trust me 100% by the way you're wiggling around back there. So if you'll step down now, and I'm going to step off, and I got one more question that I need to ask you. Let me see if we can put this down here safely again. Leo, was it easier for you to try to do it by yourself, or when you were trusting in me?
I was trusting you. I can't do it by myself.
Okay, Leo, thank you. Give him a wonderful big hand. Now, you see, there's a very interesting analogy there. The reason Leo couldn't make it, of course, he hadn't had any rehearsal or practice on that, but he was trying to do it his own way. Here's the thing, folks. He's no different than me. I like to do everything my own way. But I've learned that as I try to do everything my own way, can usually end up in a disaster. But I've also learned that when I can trust in the master of life, the way that Leo trusts in the master of the tightrope to take him across, he does give him the ability to make it from one end of life all the way to the other. Now, it doesn't mean that it's smooth sailing all the way across. There's a lot of bumps. There's a lot of misgivings. There's a lot of times that I'm thinking, Lord, where are you? But after the fact, I've discovered that he's the one who actually carried me through. The first thing each one of us need to do is make sure of our salvation. I came to Jesus Christ for fire insurance as salvation. But I learned along the way that I needed to make him the Lord of my life as well. Along with that, the only way that what he desires from me is relationship. He wants communion. We take communion on Sundays, many of us every Sunday with one another. But do we truly have communion with the creator of the universe? That's his desire. That's why he went to the cross. The way that we develop relationship and communion is twofold. knowing what his word says. And I tell you what, hopefully I'm not going to go too far over my time limit here. The biggest problem that we have in the church nowadays here in the United States is we don't know what the Bible says. We want to go by feelings because we want to love people. We've gone so far on this side of the scale that God is love that we forgot that God is also righteous. We need to know what the Bible says. And along with that, we need to truly open our hearts and communicate. That's what this is all about this morning, prayer. Praying for one another, praying for our churches, praying for our city and our county and our state, praying for our nation. I'm pretty much of an optimist most of the time, but I'm also a realist. The only hope, as a song that was written a few years ago, the only hope for America is Jesus. And you need to have him living in you. You need to be communicating with him and to know what his word says. God bless you.